The nation was shocked. Women in London who had not recovered from the abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard 6 months earlier were appalled. Another young woman had been killed in London in an apparently random attack by a stranger. I'm Chris Summers, a crime reporter, and this week we are looking at the murder of primary school teacher Sabina Nessa. September the 17th, 2021 was a pleasant Friday evening in late summer. 28-year-old Sabina Nessa had left home here in southeast London to meet a friend in a bar near Kidbrooke Station, about half a mile away. It was around 8:30 p.m. and it was getting dark, but she decided to take a shortcut through Cater Park to the Depot Bar in Pegler Square. The Sarah Everard case was still fresh in everyone's minds. Sabina had often discussed the dangers of walking through the park with her flatmate, but it is thought she was running late, so she decided to risk it because it was quicker. It was just her fatal misfortune that half an hour earlier an opportunist attacker had arrived in the park, having driven 60 miles from his home on the south coast. He was just waiting for a victim, a woman. Mr. Justice Sweeney would later go out of his way to point out that he did not go in for victim blaming. He said she had every right to be walking through the park, all glammed up and going to enjoy herself after a long week at work. What happened next was caught on this CCTV camera in Cater Park. Sabina and her killer were walking in opposite directions along this path, and as she passed, he stopped, turned and glanced around to make sure there was no one else around. He came up to her, struck her with this short metal object, struck her repeatedly, knocked her to the ground, and then dragged her into the bushes. He then returned, picked up the object which was broken during the attack, and returned to the bushes, where he spent another 10 minutes before re-emerging. He strangled Sabina, removed her tights and underwear, and pulled her clothes up. There was no doubt it was a sexually motivated attack, although there was no sign of a sexual assault. Sabina's lifeless body was left under a pile of grass until it was finally discovered the following afternoon. So who did attack Sabina, and why? Detectives trawled hours of CCTV footage and checked hundreds of cars which had passed by nearby ANPR cameras. They eventually found the killer. His name was Kochi Selamai, and he was a 36-year-old car mechanic who was born in the Albanian city of Elbasan. At the time of the murder, he was living in Eastbourne, a quiet seaside town on England's south coast, and was working in a petrol station. He had a history of domestic violence, and his Romanian wife had left him after he almost strangled her during a fight. On the night of the 17th of September, he tried to lure her into his car for sex, but she refused. He then drove around Brighton for an hour, apparently hoping to find a sex worker. He then suddenly drove north in his silver Nissan Micra, arriving in Kidbrooke just before 8 p.m. Selamai went into a Sainsbury's local supermarket next to Kidbrooke Station and bought a rolling pin. He clearly thought it would make a murder weapon, but then when he went back to his car, he spotted a reflective emergency triangle in the boot. He decided it would make a better weapon. Ironically, it was a flash of light from the reflective triangle which enabled one of the detectives to spot him on the CCTV footage as he left the park. After killing Sabina, Selamai drove back to Eastbourne and spent the night alone in a £170 room in the 5-star Grand Hotel, apparently undisturbed by any regrets or shame. He was back at work the next day, but it was not long before he was traced, arrested and charged. But the murder weapon was still missing. Detectives analysed mobile phone evidence and realised that after killing Sabina, Selimai had stopped near the River Tees in Tunbridge Wells. They realised he might have thrown it in, and police divers would later recover the murder weapon from the river. Faced with a ton of evidence, Selimai was forced to plead guilty to murder, but he continued to deny removing Sabina's underwear or tights, or that the motive had been sexual. He refused to appear in court at the Old Bailey when he was sentenced in April 2022. Sabina's sister, Jebina, called him a coward for refusing to face her family, and she read out a statement in which she told him, "You are an awful human being. You do not deserve your name to be said. You are a disgusting animal." The judge sentenced Selimai to life in prison with a minimum term of 36 years.